Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Super Data Brothers. I am Ryan, and I am flying solo today without Eric. He may drop in at the end of the show, but this is just a Ryan show today. So happy to have you here, and for today's interview with Mr. Matt Housley, third time guest I think on the show. But we always have a great time with Matt. We're going to dive deep into what are the top data and analytics, data engineering and AI trends heading into 2025. So really looking forward to the conversation. Now, as a reminder, folks, this is a live show, and it's more fun for me, and it's more fun for Matt, and it's way more fun for you if you get your questions and comments into the chat. We will read them out, and we will give you a shout out if you let us know where you are watching from. Like friend of the show, Tom Wilczek, who is tuning in from Chicago. Good to have you here again, Tom. Tom and I go way back, actually. My very first data job when I was like in my late 20s, and it was my first job on a BI team. I had no idea what I was doing. Tom was a consultant there and helped me learn the ropes of the biz. So it's good to have longtime friends in the industry, and it's good to see you here, Tom. Atanas, hey, good to see you, man. It's been a while. Welcome to the show. Okay, so let's not belabor things. Let's just bring Matt on and kick it off. So, Matt, welcome to the Super Data Brothers show.
Hey, thank you. Is the music new, or have I just not noticed before when I watch these streams?
I think you just haven't noticed. It's,
okay. It's been there for a while. All right.
Yeah. It's actually a childhood friend of my brother's who has some small, following in, and I can't even remember what they call that particular genre. It's some nerdy subgenre of like dance music that he produces. And so we have official approval and licensing permission from the artist to use the Super Data Brothers intro song.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, it's good to be here. So do you want me to, do you have a list of questions, or do we want to just kick it off by me?
No, I mean, I think we'll just kick it off. We got, oh my God, we got a couple more people saying hi. So we got Alexander Blattman tuning in from Munich. Welcome, Alexander. And then my good friend Jeffrey Favre. So some of you know, most of you know probably, that before I got into data, I had a whole career in theater, and actually Jeffrey is a friend of mine from the theater days. So Jeffrey and I went to Western Michigan University together and majored in theater and everything. And so good to see you, man. Welcome to the show.
So interestingly, this is going to tie into what I have to talk about today, the more broadly, like just human connection and communication in relation to data. So does Jeffrey also work in data now, or is he still in theater?
No. So, well, I mean, last I checked, Jeffrey was still in theater. He kind of got into the like marketing and publicity, public relations side of things. Yeah, like Jeffrey got into that at when we lived in Chicago. We lived in Chicago together too, and did some work in nonprofit theaters, and then Jeffrey kind of went into the worked at some of the major regional theaters, and then moved to New York. And so, but yeah, it's good. It's just so funny to see Jeffrey Favre tuning in to the Super Data Brothers show. Welcome, friend. We should catch up next time I'm in New York. Also, Yulia, friend of the show, Yulia tuning in. We've got Hannah watching from Bulgaria, and then Colleen Tarto saying hello, data nerds. So welcome everybody
Colleen,
to the show.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, good audience today. Jeffrey says, "Go Broncos Theater." Yeah, the Western Michigan University Broncos. That's where we. Man, that was a long time ago now. All right, so let's kick it off, Matt. The question of the day is, we're approaching the end of the year, and I just wanted to have an open-ended conversation with you about what we've seen in data in 2024, and where do we see things headed from an industry perspective, from a and then as an individual, how do you prepare for that, for what's coming? So open-ended question, but let's kick it off with that and just see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I've been thinking about a lot for, frankly, the last year and a half, and I don't think the conversation has changed that much in the last year and a half, and that is the topic on everyone's mind in the data world is generative AI. And there are two reasons for that. So first of all, generative AI kind of stole the thunder of the modern data stack back when ChatGPT came out. Suddenly, people weren't so excited about the modern data stack, even though it was just as useful as it had been before. And second, we're all very worried about our jobs now, and that's understandable. So I have a friend who works for a major international bank, and they undertook a project. I think it was to convert a bunch of old Java code into Python code. And he said basically with generative AI and using these tools, they were able to do what they used to do with 4 people, now with 2 people. So maybe that's not great news from a career perspective. But going back to the theme I introduced earlier about communication, I think what's really important for us to understand is that when someone hires an analyst or an engineer, they're not just hiring someone to sit in a cubicle and be silent and hand them reports like a machine. What they're looking for is communication and strategy and trust and that whole notion of reporting, right? What does that even mean? Well, it doesn't mean that when I report to someone, it doesn't simply mean that I hand them a report every day of some data, some analytics I've run. It means that I am accountable to them, that they can trust me to do the job, that they trust me to make sure that the numbers are right. And I think fundamentally, whether you're into your career ways or you're just kicking off your career right now, that is a critical skill that often gets overlooked in talent development. That is, you have to be able to communicate. You have to learn to be accountable. You have to learn to make yourself useful in that way. ChatGPT, generative AI, so far, I mean, we've seen these demos of like combining audio and multimodal models and such, but so far, these tools are not going to do that for you. They're not going to provide that basic level of human communication and accountability, which is so fundamental to all data work. Maybe I can get your perspective on this. I know you're the host, but like you've worked in data, but you also come from a communication background. Does this ring true to you? Is it more true now than it was like 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I attribute my success in data to my training in theater more than anything. Like the ability to communicate to communicate is important and has been the distinguishing thing for me. My ability to write and talk. When it comes to like, am I the world's greatest SQL writer or the most skilled BI at the technical aspect of it? The answer is no, I'm not. I've all throughout my career have met people who are better at that than I am. But there was always a very valuable place for me in different roles because of my ability to communicate. And the other thing, and this is, it's funny. It's funny we have Jeffrey here watching this, but theater in particular is like the art of understanding human motivations because a play is so short compared to almost anything else, and it doesn't have special effects. So you can't rely in many situations on the type of spectacle that you can in a movie to turn off people's brains. And so like a play is just condensed. It's taking the understanding of why do people do what they do and condensing it to the most condensed form of that when it comes to art. And one of the things that allowed me to do when I moved into the theater or the data world was kind of apply that thinking to my end users and my executive sponsors and try to understand why do they need what they need? What's motivating them as people, right? There's often, there's some business metric we're trying to improve. And that can be objective, but why did we choose that metric? And how are we going to try to improve it? Often have an element of subjective or values-based thinking. And your ability to understand that, I think, is more important than ever. As your ability to distinguish yourself through like your pure technical skills is muddied by AI, your ability to guide, to understand what's valuable and deliver what's valuable is more important than ever, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that a lot of us work at startups, or even if we are at a larger company, there's this notion of an enterprise and an entrepreneur. What does that literally mean, entrepreneur? It means someone who undertakes something, who undertakes a project or a vision. And it's important to remember, yes, money is important in that project, but it's about the human connection and the vision and the leadership as well. And those are skills you really need to be able to bring to the table as a data person now more than ever. Because if you're the person who just sits in a cubicle if there's a possibility of replacing you with ChatGPT, then someone will at some point, right? I don't think we're there yet, but people are looking to replace people who aren't participating in the larger vision of the company, I feel like. Have you ever seen the movie Margin Call? I was watching some clips from it last night, actually.
So I haven't.
It's a fictionalized version of like the 2008 financial meltdown that happened due to credit default swaps and a bad financial modeling. And the movie starts out basically, there's this young analyst who's been handed a model and told to look at it. So he starts digging into it, and he discovers that in the model, there's a major problem with the risk profile of the company. And so his job now is not to keep doing complex mathematical modeling. It's to communicate this up the chain of command. And the boss, played by, I think it's Kevin Spacey, says, explain it to me in English. Tell me what's going on here. I don't care about like volatility models and such. Explain to me what's going on here. And then the big boss, who's that, like Jeremy Irons or something, he pulls a meeting together in the middle of the night. He's like, explain it to me like I'm a golden retriever. And in some sense, that's our job here, right? It's like the people running our companies, the people who lead are smart people, but when they hire an analyst, they want someone who can take complex mathematical and statistical ideas and explain them in a way that fits into their larger vision. And that is a lot of your job these days as an analyst or a data engineer. And that's not to say that you don't need the technical skills. You absolutely do. In fact, a specific set of technical skills is more important than ever, and that is validation from my perspective. So I think as we rely more on these automated tools, your job is going to be, of course, you need to understand statistics, need to understand data technology, but you need to be able to validate the automated solutions that come out of these systems to see if they actually mean what you think they mean. And what do they mean for the vision of the company? What do they mean for the success of the company and for the future employment of the employees of the company? Those are the things that you need to be able to extract from the automated answers. And that's so far what these automated systems are not going to do for you entirely.
Yeah, I find that too. Like they're just not. And they, like we see that kind of all across the industry. I think like the promise is huge of these automated systems, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that and where you see it going. Like suddenly every vendor doesn't just have Gen AI, but they have agentic AI, and then I like read their description of their features, and it's like there's a chatbot. There's nothing agentic about it, but like that is such a huge part of it. And what I find, and I'm curious your experience working with these generative and automated tools is they're very good at, in my opinion, they're very good at the very obvious. So when I think about, I will admit I'm one of those people who uses chat. It's almost replaced Google for me. Like I use it constantly in my personal life and in areas where I'm not an expert, it seems like an expert to me. But in the areas where I am an expert, I find its answers to be totally wanting. Like there's just so much. It seems like it's such a basic level of answer it's able to give me, and what I believe, I'm sure is true, is that actually that's across all domains. It's just I can't recognize it in most domains because I don't have the expertise. I'm not smarter than ChatGPT in, almost all things. But in the few things I am, its answers are really wanting.
Yeah, that squares pretty well with my point of view. I mean, I think what you see often is you'll use these automated tools like Google Gemini, right? So you run your search and it gives you the regular search results, but at the top, it gives you some AI summary. And quite often, the AI summary, they probably use RAG behind the scenes. I'll have to look up what they published about their process, but they probably use a lookup database that pulls data on your query and then feeds it into ChatGPT or into Gemini, into their system. And more often than not, it misses the forest for the trees. So for example, one query I ran recently, I was asking about a particular company and their stock price. And so it gave me all this information about their stock price. And it turned out I dug a little bit further and they had recently gone private. And so in other words, what I really wanted to know is, what's this company's stock price if I wanted to invest in them, say. I can't invest in them because they're private. And so you're giving me some historical stock quotes that were probably pulled out of this database. And it did not, like, had I asked a human, like a broker or something, which is what people used to do in the old days, they'd probably tell me, oh yeah, that company, you know, I think Squarespace or something, went private recently and you can't buy their stock anymore. So,
right.
Another thing I consistently see is that ChatGPT is very good at mimicking human errors. So what's one of the most common human errors when I'm writing code or a SQL query? Well, it's that I forget the name of a column and I slightly misname it. Maybe I mess up the capitalization, the case on it, and it doesn't match. And as humans, what we do is we use an IDE, right? You use, I don't know, some JetBrains tool or something to solve these problems for you. Well, ChatGPT doesn't have that. And so it'll generate these queries with just a bunch of tiny errors like that that are almost correct, but not quite correct. And so it's almost like, to be good at using the tools, you have to be even better at SQL and at spotting errors and at using IDEs than you used to have to be. You have to develop a really refined technical sense so you can see where things are off. And then once the query is actually running, you have to get really good at validating what it's actually doing. Is it actually computing the statistics correctly? Or is it getting some detail of your internal company metrics wrong because it's not an expert in your company? You're the expert. You're the person who knows how to define a customer and how to define net profit, net margin, say, and all these other terms that are a little bit different at every company. That is now your responsibility. And if you hand that off to ChatGPT and turn in an answer or report and it's wrong, and then your boss gets in trouble because the numbers aren't consistent with some other division's numbers, that's going to be your problem. So, like, be careful to not treat the tool as a crutch that then undermines your ability to do the job well.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple comments here. Of course, we've got Aaron Wilkerson. I arrived late. Where is Eric? Yeah, Eric is had a work event, so he may make it. He may not. We'll see. It's gonna be tight. So we may have no Eric on this episode, or maybe he'll show up, towards the end, hopefully. And then we've got Lynn Bender tuning in from San Francisco. Of course, Lynn is the organizer of Day-to-Day Texas, which is my favorite data conference. I go to many data conferences, and Day-to-Day Texas is my favorite one. In fact, you can get a discount on your Day-to-Day Texas ticket if you use code SuperDataBrothers, all one word, when you purchase it. So are you going to be at Day-to-Day Texas this year?
I am going to be there, yes.
All right.
Yes.
You and Joe's like data, I don't know what you call it, data therapy session or whatever it is that you guys do at the end of Day-to-Day Texas is always so awesome.
We've done it twice. So, well, hopefully if we can hit 3 times, maybe we can say always with some confidence.
Right. Three makes it a tradition for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're interested, Day-to-Day Texas, what is it, January 25th this year? I don't have the date off the top of my head, but it's in January every year. So check it out. Other comments. Lynn also says that Margin Call is a great movie. And then we've got, so this is interesting. Polar Nights is watching on Twitch. We have a Twitch channel. I have done literally nothing with it ever. But we do live stream to Twitch among the endpoints that we live stream to. So it's LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. We're live streaming to all of them. So welcome, Polar Nights viewing on Twitch. I think you're our first Twitch commenter in history. He says, if I'm the smartest man in the room, I have nothing to do there. I need input. And then also, I like Ryan. He has those old iPads on his shelf. Books, I believe they were called.
Books are a flex these days, I tell you. They're a luxury item.
I have a Kindle and I do like it. I travel a lot, and a big part of my reading are these like giant fantasy novels. I just have always, ever since I was a kid, been. In fact, I'm reading Lord of the Rings to my kids right now. And last night we got to the part where, spoiler alert, but we got to the part where they get to Mount Doom and Frodo can't throw the ring in, and then Gollum bites his finger off and Gollum falls in. My kids are just blown away by that. But the Kindle's nice for travel. But I don't know, man. Holding an actual book, like, I guess I'm maybe it's one of the signs that I'm old, but like that is the way I prefer to consume a book is with the actual paper book in my hands.
Yeah, it's just a nice tactile experience, right? Well, again, it's similar to talking to another human. Like at some point, maybe we'll feel completely outmoded, but right now it's really nice to like talk to another human. Of course, over a call like this, even better is to sit down in a coffee shop and have a chat. Book feels kind of the same way. It's like, yeah, it's not the most efficient way to carry around information, but it's just that you smell the pages and the ink, and you can take notes in the margins, and you've read it before, and so it's well thumbed, and you know the pages that were your favorite pages in that book, and you see new things and write new notes in it. Yeah, all of that is wonderful from my perspective. Yeah.
I agree. We do have a question from Atanas. So he says, I'm curious, which topic do you find hard to explain or to communicate for? What do you think? We've talked a lot about being good at communication. What do you think is the hardest topic?
So I think I could go on a long rant about statistics, but I think ideally we'd see analysts doing more statistical analysis beyond things like averages and sums, right? That's quite often analysts are supposed to be doing statistical analyses to tell us like probable forecasts and possible ranges, margins of error, and things. I don't think enough of that happens. And I also think that analysts in general need to do more to explain statistical concepts to the people they report to. What I found in general, I came from academia, as you probably know, so I used to teach math for a long time. And in statistics, when we teach a statistics class, there tends to be way too much emphasis on proofs and like getting into all the nitty gritty. Yes, you heard that from a math person. We're actually emphasizing proofs too much in statistics. What we need is statistical thinking, like conceptual thinking, like what does a margin of error even mean when I'm explaining that to my boss? And then bring those statistical computations into it, explain the uncertainty, explain the probability, and explain how they should maybe think about some of the decision making in that context. Like this could happen with this probability, at least by my calculation, and this other thing could happen with this probability. And so I don't have a single answer for you for strategy, but maybe we should be hedging our bets a bit more for different things, different possible outcomes in the future as we're forecasting.
I've always wondered, and maybe you can give some insight into this, but in my experience, and what I think about when it comes to communicating probabilities in particular, is that the gap between what they mean to, mathematically and how people understand them is quite dangerous.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so for example, Salesforce gives you the option, what do they even call it? But it's basically the expectation value. In other words, you put in sort of a back of the napkin or just like a gut probability and say, this deal has a 50% chance of going through. And I think the deal, again, there's going to be some margin, but I think the deal is going to be about $100,000. And therefore, my expectation value for that deal is $50,000. But you also need to think about the catastrophic scenarios. So if that deal doesn't happen, does it somehow endanger your cash flow? And that's the thing you need to talk to your boss about. Like, look, we have these deals, but for a variety of reasons, actually the deals might be more correlated than we thought. Maybe there's some economic disturbance that happens. Maybe there's a big shift in the stock market, and all of a sudden, instead of getting 75% of these deals, I get 20%. Are we prepared for that contingency if that happens? I think that's real world probabilities to talk about the different outcome scenarios, and especially the ones, it's the notion of like anti-fragility, right? The ones that are going to threaten the health of the company. We need to talk about those specifically and have some level of preparation for even the low probability outcomes. Like if it's not going to harm the company much, then maybe it doesn't matter as much. But if it's something that could do severe damage to, like, I have to lay people off, then I need to at least think about that to be prepared. Maybe I need to hold a little more cash or something like that in case that happens, so I don't have to lay people off, because often that does long-term damage to my growth and to other parts of the company, not just to my ability to employ people. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with that completely. And if you just think about it in your personal life, if we're out talking and I say, it's like a 95% chance that this is going to happen. What I'm communicating to you is I am virtually certain it's going to happen. But actually, 95% is a pretty high odds that it won't happen, right?
Right.
We're talking about 1 in 20 chance that it won't happen. Well, that's actually quite likely that it won't happen, right? There's a 1 in 20 chance that we live in the world where we don't close deal X. That means you need to plan for it, because that 1 in 20 events happen constantly. I can't remember. I read it. Oh, what book was it in? I have this great book called The Drunkard's Walk, which is how randomness rules our lives. And I think I first heard of this in there, but it was just, it talks about probability and chance and the things that we attribute to causes that maybe were really just luck fundamentally. But they were talking about probabilities, and like if there's a door you would walk through and it had a 99% chance that nothing would happen, there's a 1% chance that a 2-ton metal plate would fall from the ceiling and crush you. Would you walk through the door? And it puts it in perspective. Like 99% when you're conversationally means, you're like great confidence, you should make a decision based on this. But when it's the door with the metal plate, 99% is not good enough.
Yeah. And there are times when you should go through that door, right? On this side of the door, there's some other really bad outcome that's almost like moderately bad outcome that's almost certain, right? Like you're going to get cancer or something like this in 20 years, something really bad. Now, is it worth walking through the door if there's a 1% chance that you die? It's very morbid, but like sometimes, at least in business, maybe we're talking about the death of the business or something. These are the kinds of things that you have to think through, especially a lot of startups, right? Like every startup in some sense is tenuous. It's hard running a small company, and you have a lot of pressure on you from your investors and things. And so you have to think about these different scenarios. We're going to take a big risk. Is it worthwhile? Like there's a 90% chance that we're going to grow by 10 times, and there's a 10% chance that we go out of business. Is that a risk we want to take?
What do you, shifting topics slightly, but you mentioned startups and the pressures they face.
Yeah.
What would you say is the state of data startups right now? I know that we were flying high for maybe 3 years ago, and then we had the big end of zero interest rates, and things got much more challenging for data startups.
Yeah.
What's the current lay of the land?
Oh, that is a good question. I almost feel like too much money harmed the data startup scene. And you had, I won't name any names. You can probably guess some of the things that I'm talking about here, but you had companies just driven to sky high valuations, and they raised so much money that they basically, they spent like crazy. And now in some cases, it's very hard to justify those valuations. And these companies, unless they make massive cuts, even though they raised a lot of money, are risking running out of money because they simply don't have the cash flow to support the number of employees they took on, or the contracts they took on, or other things that they did. I think companies that got less attention from venture capitalists are actually in a much better position because, frankly, from my perspective, yes, there was a big hype cycle that drove adoption of the modern data stack, but the need for like basic data tools, I don't think has changed all that much. And so I think companies that kind of kept their heads down, focused on the basics, on revenue and such, and didn't see their valuations explode might actually be a lot better off right now. I'm still waiting. I still think there will probably be some carnage and creative destruction at some point, meaning acquisitions of smaller companies by other companies, kind of the rebundling of a lot of tools as companies that have good products but maybe can't survive on their own get rolled into larger companies, the cloud vendors and such. But I think it's still a relatively good place to be, that the employment situation has been a little rough. We've seen some layoffs and such, and that might continue for a while. But I think within the next decade or so, the future still looks pretty bright. And go ahead.
Yeah. It's very interesting because good data, we've been around a little longer than a lot of these companies. Good Data was founded in 2008, and we've been cash flow positive now for many, many years. And so our experience of this situation has been different, right? Like there was no slamming on the brakes at Good Data and, we've got to let go, 80% of the company, or we took on all these contracts that were unprofitable because we were trying to show subscriber growth. And, there's none of that. Like there's been a focus on the profitability of the company for a long time, which in the high flying days made it feel like, I think made it seem, it made it challenging when you've got people who don't have to worry about making money. But now the other side of the coin has turned. and it's like, well, we've always been profitable, so there was no change in company culture necessary to achieve it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I think if you're in that position, you just, you keep going basically, and there are a lot of opportunities out there. I think another thing I would say about the data engineering space specifically, when Joe and I wrote Fundamentals of Data Engineering, there's kind of a tone there that we don't specifically say this in the book, but my attitude at the time was that maybe some of these more sophisticated data engineering techniques, such as natural language processing, were overemphasized. What we typically saw is that so many businesses were struggling with the basics of data, with just like doing basic analytics and managing data quality and such. And yes, things like NLP were important, but overemphasized in the curricula. And I think what's kind of flipped now is that with generative AI, there's all kinds of demand for natural language processing. And of course, right now we're doing all of this with Gen AI. But if you look at the numbers, they simply don't make sense. In other words, the estimates I've seen, depending on whether you ask OpenAI or some outside analysts and how they amortize the costs of all these NVIDIA cards and chips that are going to depreciate over time, is that an average ChatGPT query costs between 30 and 70 cents, depending on whose estimate you believe. Any of those estimates are absolutely crazy, right? If you look at what ChatGPT charges, what OpenAI charges for a subscription, that is not a sustainable model in the long term. And this, I think, is going to lead to a huge comeback for classical NLP methods. Like basically, ChatGPT is not going away. We're going to continue to use it for a lot of things. But for a lot of automation of text processing at scale, where this is not going to be economical, you're going to go back to classical NLP methods and use those instead. And to do things like, I'm aware of one company that analyzes medical records in a trimodal fashion. So in other words, they use classical NLP, they use small language models that are specialized to medical records, and they use your LLMs that have a massive number of parameters and they're trained across vast data sets. And so I feel like as a data engineer right now, that's one thing I'd actually be really digging into, contrary to my advice a couple of years ago, is look at basic text processing techniques and such, because I think they're going to be way, way in demand in the future, but still get really good at the core skills, because those are just never going away. Like ever since data analytics has been a thing, those core skills have always been hard. And so just keep grinding on those, on data quality, on communication, on understanding SQL, that set theory, statistics, all of these things that make you a really good analyst and data engineer.
It's funny you mentioned that, because we're, like all vendors, there's enormous pressure to add AI features to everything. And so we've got some generative AI features that are going into production over the course of the next few months at Good Data. But one of the things that we've done is we built out the underlying architecture so that it can support LLMs, SLMs, and classical ML in all on the same platform, using the same compute with the same semantic layer and SQL generation engine and all that sort of stuff, so that we can, for exactly this reason, so we can choose the right technology that gives us the right cost versus performance profile, right? Because at some point, just like what we've seen with, with all startups, there comes a time when the investors, or if they IPO, the public markets demand a turn to profitability. And when that happens, it's going to be quite a challenge for vendors. There are many BI vendors who have very impressive products built entirely on OpenAI. And if suddenly OpenAI turns around and says, okay, we need 80% margin on these queries, what does that do to the vendor where OpenAI is like, they're a wrapper for it, a very good one, but that's what they are. It's going to be a very challenging situation, I think.
Yeah, completely agree. And I mean, we saw this happen just within the last couple of years. And again, I'm not naming names here, but you don't have to look very far to know who I'm talking about. Some of these modern data stack vendors were basically giving their product away. And then all of a sudden, the cost went up for many companies, depending on how their workloads were structured and such, by a factor of 10 or more. And some big companies could afford that, many could not, and had to cancel their subscriptions or cut way back on what they were doing. And so if you put something in your product and you don't have a contractual guarantee of the API price, which I don't imagine OpenAI is going to give you for the next 5 years, then they may at some point say, yeah, we can't continue basically giving away this API access. It's costing us way too much money.
Yeah. And we've even seen, I think it was today or yesterday, very recently, Microsoft announced a 40% increase in the Power BI price, which again is a tool that Microsoft gave away basically for free in order to achieve market share.
Yeah. And it's a very good tool from what I've seen. I mean, I don't love all Microsoft products. I'll just be frank about that. But that's one of their better tools that they offer. But yeah, they're not going to, they're going to charge for that. They're going to make back their investment and more over time. So you have to, and I mean, again, this could be far over time. You might have a lot of those 40% increases happening over a period of years.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as a vendor who competes with Microsoft, they've made the whole BI space very challenging with their willingness, because their tool is very good and it fits the classic BI use case of, I need a tool that I can distribute to a large volume of analysts. And then they kind of independently, using their own initiative and intelligence, and the fact that they're often embedded within a business unit, are going to produce value, right? And I just need to give them the toolkit to produce value. It fits that very well. But Microsoft did not become one of the most profitable companies in the history of the world by giving tools away for free.
Right. And it's a classic, like, Slack is not owned by Microsoft, but it's a similar business model. At first, it was very cheap. And then, it's a per seat license, and you're going to pay for everyone within your company. And we may not even let you limit the number of people who can use it. We may require you to say, so many thousands of people all have a Slack license, and this is how much it's going to cost per person per month. And yes, Power BI and these other tools, the same thing may very well happen. So I guess we've wandered into another topic here, which is like rising prices of a lot of these tools. And so I'm sure at Good Data, you have a very specific perspective on how companies can combat this. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh, yeah. So, I think what I see happening, and one of the things that we're kind of our product roadmap at Good Data reflects is, you mentioned consolidation, and we see consolidation at the kind of at the vendor level. I haven't seen as much of it as I expected, I would admit at this point. I thought we would see more, of these kind of we do reverse ETL and that's it. And like, how many companies just do reverse ETL? It's a lot. We haven't seen quite as much consolidation there as I expected, but I still predict it'll happen. But one of the things we see when it comes to cost control among customers is a similar move, right? Like if I have 15 vendors who are producing my data stack, and I don't have like negotiation power with them like I would if it was a single vendor for whom this is and there's two sides of that coin, right? You have maybe more risk with a single vendor, but a larger contract with one vendor maybe has more value to that vendor, and that vendor is willing to do more for you, right? And so there's kind of two sides to that coin, and that's one of the things we're doing at Good Data is like we're designing Good Data for more and more use cases as time goes on, because we think that there will be consolidation, especially at the enterprise level. There's so many customers we have. They could never procure the modern data stack. Like, forget whether they wanted it. The procurement processes would never allow them to onboard 15 vendors in a year, right? It's like asking for a pony for Christmas or something. It's not going to happen. So that's one of the things that we see. Again, like at Good Data, we're in a position where we haven't had to really turn the screws to our customers because we were already profitable.
So tell me this, I'm curious your perspective on this. I think you're absolutely right about modern data stack. And this was a problem from the get-go. I mean, the modern data stack really goes back to like early 2010s, but when it got really big, There was a lot of hype around it 2020, 2021, 2022. And in practice, what happened quite a bit is there was a lot of shadow IT. And so you just get your manager, had a company credit card, you put, this product X, Y, and Z on the credit card until someone notices. What do you see happening in your customers? Is there a lot more discipline happening? Are they not just belt tightening, but saying, hey, we can't have these outside, legal will not allow this. We've got to shut all this stuff down. Like what do you see?
Yeah, they are. And we're seeing that from, so there's the belt tightening and the legal angle. And then the other place we're seeing it from is actually, at least in the BI space, we're seeing a big move away from kind of the pure self-service play, right? A recognition that we may have, this is pendulum swings in IT forever, right? That we may have gone too far with the every department, they can use their own tools, and like the analysts, they're all going to have their own BI tool. They're just going to do stuff that there's a desire to find ways to rein some of that in, but I think that kind of in new ways, right? So not go back to the way we had centralized IT in 2005, right? I see a lot of the influence of data mesh, particularly around data products and engineering practices coming into analytics to try to allow a central team to manage more and govern more with a degree of velocity and quality and the ability to deliver that we didn't have, in 2005. When things were very locked down as far as analytics were concerned. And if you wanted a report, you had to put in a request and wait 18 months, to change the chart from blue to green. Like that's when I started my career, that was kind of how we did BI. And so in a lot of ways, I do see like that shadow IT is, which really exploded. I mean, I think you're right. Like that is the way that the modern data stack really grew. And actually, I give Tableau was the first instance that I saw of that. The way Tableau exploded in maybe 2013 was by, your IT team had Cognos or business objects or MicroStrategy, and you were sick of waiting for them. And you could buy 5 licenses of this cool visualization tool, and then Tableau was able to make the transition to eventually, they got the enterprise features and they replaced business objects or Cognos or Tableau in many of those places. But overall, like I do kind of see, so to actually answer your question, with these modern data stack vendors, I predict that most of them will not be able to make that transition, and that the re-centralization of some degree of data will involve the central team kind of imposing a degree of their tooling on shadow IT. The very best of the modern data stack vendors will in fact follow the Tableau path, and will say, get into a position where the centralized team ditches their ETL tool in favor of one that came in through a department.
Yeah, and I think a classic example of this, not actually specific to the data space, but is Atlassian, right? Atlassian, I don't even remember what tool they started with, but Atlassian basically was able to build a platform from a small set of tools, and then they just kept acquiring companies to add to their platform. And so now the Atlassian suite is all these different tools that interoperate, that exchange data well. It's almost like one big, operating system of tools that work together. And that's, I mean, Matt Turk has kind of said the same thing in this space, that to be a really successful startup these days, you can't build a product, you have to build a platform. Product is the starting point, but eventually you need to be a one-stop shop for a lot of different tools that work together. Yeah. I think I want to go back to what you were saying about data mesh too. I completely agree with this idea that we're not going back to the bad old days. In other words, we're not going to have totally centralized control, and we're not going to have DBAs that rule with an iron fist anymore. But what we will have, we talk about this actually in fundamentals of data engineering, is architects who choose the tool sets and then say, go do your thing. We're going to train you. You can use Snowflake, or maybe we're going to tell you to use BigQuery, and you can use AWS, but we're not going to have 5 different clouds. We'll have like 1 or 2 different clouds. Yeah, it'll be kind of like a buffet of tooling, and there will be more team independence, but you can't just go onboard a tool without talking to us. If you come to us, there's a very compelling reason. We'll let you onboard it and interoperate with the other tools we have, and maybe we'll even make it a standardized tool across the company, just like Tableau, if it's good enough. But you're not going to be just adopting some random tool out of nowhere, because we can't support it. And when you leave the company, we're going to have problems, and legal is going to throw a fit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely it. And I think that there will, one of my predictions is that we will see an increased focus on having a well-maintained library of centralized metrics that are available to everybody. And then the challenge will be, is it easy enough to combine those metrics on the fly in the way you need to, kind of at the edge, right? In department X or department Y, or for product Z, and Zhamak talks a lot about that in data mesh, and kind of her vision for how that works. I'm kind of curious when it comes to data mesh, what is the state of data mesh? I think that that's another one of those ideas that when you talk about like Gen AI bulldozed the modern data stack, it also, I feel like in some ways it kind of bulldozed the data mesh hype. So what is the state of it right now?
I think my position is that the data mesh concept is here to stay and is chugging along, right? I'm old enough to remember the dot-com bust, and what happened with the dot-com bust. Well, pets.com and all these crazy little companies with no business model went out of business, but then the internet just kept going. And I feel like data mesh is the same thing. I will say that from my perspective, the most important aspect of data mesh is just simple permission management and data sharing. It's like the really boring, banal stuff. And I think that's partly what's going to drive adoption of these simple platforms like Snowflake and BigQuery and Redshift, is that these platforms make it very easy to share data. I mean, in BigQuery, you just go in, you set some permissions for another group or user, and suddenly they have access to the table. They can query it using their costs, basically paying for the queries. I think that's really the future. I think if you don't have that, and if you have to build all the permission systems on your own, then data mesh becomes a huge headache, because first of all, just getting the data to someone else is very hard. And second, like, companies, if they don't have really robust permission systems in place, are going to freak out from a legal perspective as we shift more and more attention to data security, to data privacy. You have to have sharing, but you have to have a very robust permission system, user management system built on top of it. And for most companies, it just does not make sense to build that stuff from scratch. And so you're probably going to go to one of these vendors, or I think even Zhamak has some projects along these lines, right? She's working on something similar that should allow easy data sharing across a bunch of different platforms. And that's the real critical ingredient. And then beyond that, it's the people aspect, right? It's training people to like really make their data high quality to share with other teams, giving them the incentives to do that, and allowing them to be independent, but also making them accountable so that they stand behind the data they deliver, and they make sure that it's fit for different purposes within the company.
Yeah. I see that too. So we got 10 minutes left, folks.
Yeah.
If you have questions for Matt, get them in. I'll read them, right? Again, live show. I do want to highlight this comment from Lynn.
Yeah. So this is Lynn's comment. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. So Lynn says, Chris Manning wrote the statistical natural language processing book back in 2001, and it was a decade before computers were fast enough to begin to apply the methods at scale. Do you see anything out there right now that is in kind of a similar state, where maybe we've identified, the method, but we don't have the computational power or the architectures in place that maybe will be influential in the future?
That is a good question. So I will apply this to Gen AI itself. I think right now, as it stands, yes, we have the computational power, but at the moment, I think Gen AI is way, way too expensive for the stuff we're using it for. At the same time, I think within the next couple of years, we'll figure out ways to cut the cost by a factor of 10 or more. to reduce the training data sets, to like filter out things like hate speech, to make the training processes far, far more efficient, to lower the cost per token, to push things to the edge. That's the one that immediately comes to mind. There are probably a bunch of other things that I'm not thinking about off the top of my head, and I need to think more about this question because this is really interesting. I'll have to chat with Lynn about it too and get his perspective if there's anything he sees right now that is along these lines. Okay, so I want to draw another parallel actually to the dot-com boom and bust in the 90s. Back then, everyone was talking about how we were all going to be streaming video within a few years. But then engineers looked at it and said, there's no way that the internet can support that kind of scale. It does not make any sense. Within a decade, we had the infrastructure to do it. And again, I feel like we're kind of in the same spot with Gen AI, where actually the costs are way, way too high right now. But we're seeding this technology to get a lot cheaper and a lot more efficient in the future.
Do you predict a similar cycle? Like, we're going to build a lot on Gen AI today. The economics of it are going to become clear and the limitations. There's going to be a Gen AI bust. Half of these, or maybe more of them, of these Gen AI vendors or vendors that their only value is what they add or what they've built on Gen AI are going to pop. And then the economics will become more feasible, and suddenly all the vision of what we could do with it will at that point be buildable.
I think that's quite possible. One comment I have is that things have already started to quietly change. So right after ChatGPT came out, you could basically just build a wrapper around the ChatGPT API, around OpenAI's APIs, and go pitch it to venture capitalists, and they would give you $50 million, right? And within a year, that started to change, and venture capitalists are like, wait a minute here. Like, we actually need to know what's going on under the hood. We need to know what's unique to your company. Someone else can't just build an exactly similar tool. And honestly, I kind of expected some kind of a bust to happen already. So maybe, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with this cycle. I kind of feel like it's not sustainable. And so I don't see how we can just keep trucking forward without some kind of a bust at some point. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe we'll figure out how to just like slide through this whole part of the cycle and keep going and cut costs as we're going and make it a viable business. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one of the, there are a couple of differences. And I think one of the big ones is just the players. You know, in the dot-com era, Amazon wasn't Amazon, right? It was an upstart. It was a company in Jeff Bezos's garage, and the major players in AI seem to be the incumbents, you know, or people who are funded largely by the incumbents, and so that, I mean, that's just, I wonder if that will create a fundamentally different cycle, right? Microsoft is not going to go bust because of their investment in OpenAI, because they won't allow that to happen, right? And they have the resources to prevent it. Whereas Pets.com, when the chickens came home to roost, you know, Pets.com was gone.
Yeah, I mean, it just didn't have any kind of sustainable business model. Once the VC funding was gone, they could not keep going because they didn't have the infrastructure, they didn't have the cost management that they needed to keep going. I think you bring up an interesting point though, and I think one thing you have to look at is that the economy now is fundamentally different. I forget what is NVIDIA's valuation right now. It's like close to $4 trillion.
It's
still
insane.
And that's like, if you look at the magnificent, at these big tech companies, no company in history has been as valuable as some of these companies are now. And so, like, we're not just repeating history, like fundamentally new things are happening. I think one of the really interesting battles to watch is the battle between the incumbents like Google, where a lot of this technology originated, and the well-funded upstarts like OpenAI. Yeah, that's...
Yeah. I saw that recently that NVIDIA's CEO is worth more than Intel.
And incumbents are falling too, right? Like we have
Right.
incumbents that are totally dominant, and we have others that are seem to be at their nadir. And so the
Yeah.
question is, will those companies, is Intel going to make a big comeback, or are they headed into more permanent decline? And are they going to be knocked out of position by TSMC and by ARM and by other players in the market?
Yeah. I mean, the computer I'm using right now is it's obviously totally different market, but I chose an AMD chip to put in this thing for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Is I have an AMD CPU in my gaming computer right here.
Oh, you have okay, so this is a gaming computer. So
Oh yeah,
what games, to sidetrack us just slightly, what games do you like to play?
I have this monster gaming computer. Okay, so I have it's a few years old now, but I have like a 16 core processor, and I have a RTX 4080 GPU and 128 gigabytes of RAM and all this, and this insane ultra wide monitor. And then what I actually play is like strategy games that don't need any of that, right? So Crusader Kings 3, I've been playing a lot of lately. I play an MMO with my dad called New World that he's like super into. And actually, I don't even game that. I spend most of my time gaming playing a Switch,
Okay.
playing Zelda. And I don't game that much because, executive and I got young kids and all that sort of stuff. So.
And you're
So
trying
gaming
to
PC is aspirational for me. It's something I'd like to be able to use.
yeah. But I think I want to go back to just the whole concept of gaming PCs, which goes back to, I think, the 90s is when Games for Windows came out, and how we've driven this technology, and then now we're using it for something completely different that was never intended for. And I kind of feel like the same thing is going to happen with Gen AI. We're going to figure out entirely new applications that, like in 2024, we just haven't even thought of yet. And the things we're using Gen AI for in 2026 or 2034 might be kind of unrecognizable to us right now. I mean, we saw the same thing with smartphones when they came out, right?
Oh yeah.
No one thought we were going to like be hailing rides with our smartphones when the iPhone first came out, or we were going to be shooting a lot of selfies around social media all the time. I don't think we had thought of those applications when it came out.
No, we in fact gosh, where were we? Were we in Prague? We were somewhere, my wife and I, and there's a 5-year gap between us, and that is the difference. That is enough difference that I hailed cabs and she didn't, right? And we were somewhere and we couldn't use an app, and I was like, oh, I got it, and like I just raised my hand, and that felt totally natural to me. And she was like, what are you doing?
You're drawing attention to us. What are you?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Quick comment here again from Tom Wilczek. He asks, do you play Stellaris? Yes, I do, Tom. And actually, it does help. Like you can have the biggest galaxy in Stellaris, and the simulation speed is still fast because of the 16 core processor. So that's pretty nice. All right. So last question, and we've already talked about it a lot, but this is the last question of every episode. If you were a young person entering data today, or someone making a career transition, what is the number one thing you would focus going into 2025 to insulate your career and make sure that you're able to add value in data?
Maybe I would take some communication classes. It seems to have worked pretty well for you, Ryan. And I think I credit a lot of my success to that as well. I didn't study drama, but I was a college professor for a long time. And so I got a lot of practice communicating in front of groups of people and writing. And those are the things. I'd take writing classes. I would find a writing coach. I would learn to present in front of groups, like these things. And of course, do the basic stuff, right? Do the fundamentals. But if you can do those things, then you're going to go far in your career.
Amen. All right. Thank you for joining us today, Matt.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, as always. All right. So thanks, folks, for joining us today. You've been a great audience, great questions and feedback. As a reminder, we are here every Thursday, most Thursdays, at noon Eastern time, the Super Data Brothers show. We have an awesome lineup going through the remainder of the fall. Let me see. Who do we have coming up? You would think I would know this off the top of my head. But coming up next week, we have joining us. As my Google Doc loads. very slowly. Okay, joining us next week, we have wrong account. Well, this is a bust. We have someone cool joining us next week. I'll promote it on LinkedIn. So I want to thank you for coming today. You can always catch us, the replay, on YouTube, youtube.com/C/Super Data Brothers. Go there, like the video, subscribe, tell your friends, help spread the word about the show. I want to thank Matt for joining us. He was a great guest as always. He even wore our shirt. So thank you, Matt, for that. By the way, we do have Super Data Brothers shirts. I have one next to me right here. They are not available for sale. The only way to get a Super Data Brothers shirt is to attend a conference and ask me for one. And you're going to have to catch me early because I only bring a few, and they go fast. You will be able to catch us. You will be able to catch us at Data Day Texas, January 25th and 26th of 2025. Use code Super Data Brothers, all one word, to get 20% off your registration for Data Day Texas. We will see you there. Aaron brings up a great point that he is in fact the guest next week. Sorry, I failed on that one, Aaron. But the chat with Matt was just so engaging. I forgot to bring up my end of show notes. So that's what happens when you do a live show. Of course, we're always live here at Super Data Brothers, and that's what makes it fun. Okay. Until next week when we talk to Aaron Wilkerson. Aaron, by the way, is one of the co-organizers of the Detroit Data Meetup with me. So if you are watching in the Detroit area, or you would love to visit lovely Detroit, which is much nicer than you think, I promise, join us at an upcoming Detroit Data Meetup. We'd love to see you there. Okay, enough promotion. I'll see you next week, folks. Take care. Bye.